Kieran Foran is a Rugby League legend. He's a 300-game veteran, a premiership winner, and was one of the best halves in his prime. But there was one thing he couldn't stop, and that was himself.
The way in which I was going to deal with feeling shit. I was going to go and have a punt. I was going to go and have a drink.
And when he became one of the highest paid players in the NRL, he hit rock bottom.
I just got to a point one night where I just went, my life sucks and it's never going to get better. I'm done.
This is how one of the league's premier halves lost himself to addiction, but managed to fight his way back and has now become an NRL legend. Kieran Foran grew up in Auckland, New Zealand, in a house where rugby was a religion. His father was obsessed with the All Blacks. But while he idolised All Blacks legends, young Kieran's path would take him down a different road. Just 200 metres from his house was the Ellerslie Eagles Rugby League Club, where he would end up playing junior footy while he was in New Zealand.
The moment I could run, I was enrolled at Ellerslie Eagles, so I never actually played rugby.
But it didn't take long for a change to come to Kieran. At 7 years old, the Foran family made a decision that would change everything. They packed up and moved to Sydney. It was here, in the rugby league heartland of Australia, where Kieran's obsession truly began. The work ethic was relentless. While other kids were playing video games, Kieran was in the backyard working on his footy.
I remember drawing a target on the brick wall at home and just throwing the footy into it for hours on end.
With his time in Sydney, he played for several junior clubs, including the Asquith Magpies, the North Sydney Brothers, and even played for the North Sydney Bears. On top of this, he was even selected in the Australian Schoolboys Rugby League team in 2007. Playing in these rep games and his skills would cause the attentions of clubs to look at him. And the one he would sign with is the Manly Sea Eagles. Everyone that knows Kieran on the field remembers him for being a halfback or a 5'8". But what most people don't know is that he was never supposed to play in the halves. Through his junior career, he played centre, fullback, and even lock forward. Anything but the halves.
Not many people know I was an outside back as a kid. I signed as a centre, I went and played SG ball. I left North Sydney Bears and went and played SG ball at Manly in the centres.
At 16, while playing SG ball for Manly, Kieran faced the harsh reality that every young athlete fears. He might not be good enough.
And I actually didn't know whether I was going to be able to make NRL as an outside back.
The centres in first grade were monsters. How could a kid standing at 5'11" compete with them? But then came a conversation that changed everything. Manly coach Des Hasler pulled him aside.
He basically said to me, mate, I don't have any halves at the moment. I'm going to run you at 5'8".
This was a shock for Kieran, but he didn't make the position change on his own. In fact, he had one of the greatest halves in the world to help him out, Andrew Johns.
And it was a wonderful thing Joey did with me through that time. He didn't try and shape me into a natural halfback. He just tried to give me a few little things that would enhance my strengths.
In early 2009, Kieran would make his NRL debut in round 15 as the starting 5'8" for Manly, cementing his spot in the role. But it didn't just end there. Later in the year, he was picked for the New Zealand international team in their extended squad, publicly declaring he would represent the nation. Kieran would continue to play excellent footy for Manly and the Kiwis over the next few years. But when 2011 came around, that would be the year that defines his career. He had transformed from an uncertain teenager into one of the most promising players in the game. Partnered with Daly Cherry Evans in the Manly halves, they were the perfect combination. Later that year, at just 21 years old, Kieran Foran would play in his first grand final, and the Sea Eagles would go on to defeat the Warriors 24-10 to claim the 2011 premiership. For Kieran, it was everything he'd worked for. Everything was going great for Kieran. He was young, talented, successful, and appeared to have the world at his feet. But beneath the surface, cracks were already beginning to form. To understand how Kieran's life spiraled so dramatically, you have to go back to the roots of how it would unravel.
Started to go a little bit off path was, my parents divorced when I was 13. They got separated.
The pressure of being an elite athlete, combined with his early life experiences, had taught him to deal with stress in ways that seemed normal on the surface, but were actually laying the foundation for addiction.
I had already learnt at that point that the way in which I was going to deal with feeling shit, I was going to go and have a punt, or I was going to go and have a drink.
The warning signs were there, but in the culture of rugby league, admitting weakness wasn't an option. So Kieran did what so many young men do. He buried his pain and kept pushing forward. But while all this was happening behind the scenes, his career was reaching new heights. He would play in another grand final in 2013. He was a consistent performer for both club and country, and he was regarded as one of the premier 5'8" in the game. But internally, the wheels were beginning to come off. 2016 was supposed to be Kieran Foran's year. He signed a massive deal with the Parramatta Eels, ready to lead them to glory. But instead, it became the year that almost killed him. The move to Parramatta became a nightmare. The gambling and drinking that had started as social activities had evolved into full-blown addictions. The pressure of the big money contract combined with his personal demons created a perfect storm. The spiral accelerated rapidly, and the very success that had defined him began to crumble. He was seeing a counsellor, desperately seeking help, but even with this, it still couldn't break the cycle. There was plenty of things going on behind the scenes. His relationship with his partner had broken down. She had just given birth to their second child. Manly allegedly owed him $140,000 from a sponsorship dispute. Parramatta was facing the loss of competition points from their salary cap scandal, and underneath it all, the addictions were consuming him. But in the middle of the season, he would get injured, and that injury would be the final straw. The one thing consistent in his life was rugby league, and that had been taken away just when he needed it the most. Suicidal thoughts had been building up for weeks. Then Kieran Foran made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would overdose on prescription medication and would end up being rushed to hospital.
The biggest regret I've ever got in my life is making that decision.
But his struggles wouldn't end there. Later throughout the same year, his betting account was leaked, showing he lost $75,000 in one gambling binge. And after some other alcohol incidents, it was announced that Foran had been released from his contract with Parramatta to sort out his personal issues. There was a possibility that he would never play rugby league again. But before he could even consider getting back on the field, he needed to look after himself. He checked into rehab facilities. Even then, the real world was waiting with all its temptations. But something had changed. The near-death experience had given him a clarity he'd never had before. But as Kieran was still on the mend, in 2017, he would return to professional rugby league. He was given a chance by the New Zealand Warriors, a chance that not many other clubs would give. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were more injuries, more setbacks. But this time was different. This time he had the tools to cope with it. The following years, Kieran would play some great footy and bounce around between clubs. After the Warriors, he went to the Bulldogs, then back to Manly, then end up with the Gold Coast Titans. But the real victory wasn't on the field. It was in the daily choices that kept him healthy. With Kieran's footy career back on track, he steadied on the next several years playing between those clubs. This comeback story would reach its emotional peak during the 2023 Pacific Championship, where Foran was called back into the New Zealand international team. It was a masterstroke. Foran's leadership and energy from dummy half helped New Zealand claim their first major trophy in years, with the dominant win over Australia in the finals, winning 30-0. But just as all these troubles seemed to be behind him, life delivered another devastating blow. That same year in 2023, his stepson Logan took his own life. The tragedy could have easily sent Kieran spiraling back into old patterns. Instead, Kieran made a conscious decision to speak openly about mental health and suicide.
I knew at that point that I had to be prepared to make it a topic of discussion.
Not just for Logan's memory, but for anyone fighting similar battles. The message was clear. Suicide is never the answer. But as Kieran managed his own demons over the years, he never stopped being a warrior on the field. His body was breaking down. There were multiple surgeries, injuries, but his heart for the game remained unbroken. At 34, when a lot of players would have long retired, Kieran was still entering the field for the Gold Coast Titans. He became the first player to ever reach the 300 NRL game milestone while wearing the Titans jersey. But it wasn't just about personal milestones. Kieran had become something more valuable than a great player. He'd become a mentor, a leader for young players struggling with their own challenges. Recovery isn't about one dramatic moment. It's about small, daily decisions made over years. Kieran learned this the hard way. He'd learned to find contentment in the small moments, the very thing that had once seemed impossible during his darkest days. In July 2025, Kieran announced his retirement, ending a 17-year NRL career. His final game would be a victory, helping the Titans to a comeback win over the West Tigers.
And a great career comes to an end. He went to hell and back, personally and on the field, injuries galore, and he gets a great moment. This is a wonderful moment.
A perfect ending to Kieran's incredible career. 318 NRL games across 6 clubs, 31 tests for New Zealand, through addiction, mental health battles, countless injuries, and personal tragedy, he clawed his way back from hell and is now a leading role model for the younger generation. I just want to directly congratulate Kieran Foran, not only on an incredible career, but also for having the courage to share his story and to encourage others in the process to seek for help, at the same time letting them know they're not alone in their struggles. Thanks for watching.